I freely confess, I sat down to watch this movie expecting to be disappointed. I thought it would only be in regards to the disability tropes, not, like, the entire movie as a whole. So I watched Ni no Kuni on Netflix, and it sure is something, which is bad. That something is bad. Not even, like, so bad it's good, though admittedly I've never quite gotten that as, like, a concept. It's just bad in that unpleasant way where just when you think you have a hang on what's going on, they decide to pull the rug out from under you or switch up how the world works. I also only learned after I'd already watched it that it's based off of a video game, so, probably my mistake having any hopes for the quality on this one. I'm sorry if the pronunciation I put on especially one character's name is gonna be weird, but it resembles an actual Finnish word too much. My brain won't let me say it any other way. I'm sorry in advance. Anyway, to summarize real quick, you, Haru, and Kotona are childhood friends. You and Haru both like Kotona, but she's Haru's girlfriend. Early on in the movie, she gets stabbed by this mysterious stranger, and through a series of shenanigans, the three of them end up in the street, almost hit by a truck. At which point, you and Haru get thrown into an alternate fantasy universe, where they discover a girl who looks exactly like Kotona, but is actually a different person named Princess Astrid. Yu saves her life, and we learn that he and Haru might be something called wayfarers, people who can jump between the worlds when their lives are in danger. But when they later get back to their own world, Kotona's been diagnosed with cancer very suddenly. Yu remembers a weird old man who he met in the hospital when he was 5 who told him about the other world and that there are lives in both worlds that are linked somehow. Haru immediately jumps to the conclusion that because they saved Astrid's life, Kotona is now dying, and becomes hellbent on killing Astrid, which Yu is not on board with, pitting them against each other. Haru gets taken in by the main villain and told that if a life marked for death in one of their worlds is saved, a life in the other is taken in payment, which is of course complete bullshit. The truth is, when one of these linked lives dies in one world, so will the other. Yu manages to prove this to Haru, and they get back on the same side just in time for the final fight with the main baddie, who turns out to be secretly the kingdom's magic chancellor, but that's not enough of a plot twist because it turns out he's also the king's supposedly dead brother, who brought himself back to life and made himself into a monster, and the entire final confrontation has to grind to a halt for a full 3 minutes while the characters stand around and talk about that. Anyway, they fight, they win, there's a whole bit where Yu gets very badly injured, but then given a magic sword by that old guy from the hospital and healed up, and then it all comes to a close when we're told that actually the rules that we thought the magic was following weren't right, and Yu and Haru aren't wayfarers, they just world jump because of the main villain's magic, and now that he's dead, they won't be able to jump back if they cross over again. We're told this because Astrid says it. I have no idea how she knows this, but okay, fine, we'll go with it. Yu stays behind, Haru goes back. Except then, they pull a final plot twist on us, which is that Yu was never from our world to begin with. He came over as a baby, which contradicts the contradiction on how the Wayfarer thing works again, and apparently we're supposed to believe that Yu and Haru's lives were linked like Astrid's and Kotona's, except they look nothing alike, and for all that time during the final battle, while Yu was actively dying, Haru was up and fighting just fine. So yeah, that in brief is the plot of Ni no Kuni, the movie. So, let's talk about it as a movie. The pacing feels very rushed, the characterization gets weird, especially with Haru, who has to be rushed through both a corruption arc and a redemption arc within the span of 1 hour and 30 minutes, which leads to awkward things like him going from being devastated that his girlfriend was diagnosed with terminal cancer to absolutely rearing to go, convinced that some good old-fashioned murder is the only way to save her, and then later, when he's flipped sides again, no one questions why he's there? He just shows up with you, and no one bats an eyelash about the guy who was attacking them yesterday suddenly being in the throne room. Again, the main villain is so poorly set up, we needed 3 minutes of exposition to explain his existence and motivations before we can actually get into the final showdown, and there's some truly awkward 3D animation going on in the background of the fight scenes, and all of that's not even touching on how they handle youth disability, which was what I was actually going into this movie with the intention to review. So let's actually do that, now that I've gotten all of that out of my system. This movie actually had a decent start when it came to portraying a disabled character. They show you just living his life with his friends using a wheelchair. His room is clearly designed with him in mind, and early on there's a scene where Kotona and Haru want to go to this new crepe shop, but it's up a long flight of stairs, and Yu excuses himself to leave so his friends won't have to give up on their plans, because those plans are inaccessible to him. Which fucking sucks, but it is a thing 99% of disabled people have dealt with at some point in their lives. So really, up until we get tossed into the other world, we're doing great. But then we do get to the alternate world, and, well, Yu just stands up and walks. Just up he goes. Doesn't even look around for his wheelchair or question why he doesn't have it. He just stands up. This guy has not walked a day in his life. His injury happened to him when he was a baby, and he doesn't even notice he's walking until his friend points it out. Granted, he's in a world where he suddenly has the ability of a master swordsman and also magic, but those things shocked him. He noticed them because they read as weird and not something he should be able to do. Kind of like, moving his legs. Even beyond that, though, even if I'm willing to believe this guy who's been paraplegic his entire goddamn life wouldn't notice he's suddenly able to move his legs again, he sure as hell would notice that he's about twice as tall as he should be suddenly. There's a pretty marked difference between the world you see when you're standing up and the world you see when you're sitting down. Yu's been using a wheelchair his entire life. Standing up should be incredibly disorienting, or at the very least something he notices. He also later doesn't even blink when someone tells him his room is upstairs after walking for less than a full day after 16 years of being a wheelchair user. Really, I hate to ever ask this, but why even make him a wheelchair user at this point? The movie does literally nothing with it, apart from give him a reason to be sad in the beginning because he couldn't do a thing with his friends. It feels kind of mean-spirited, honestly. See this character who is like you? Well, he can't be a hero unless we remove his disability. It would have been so cool to see a high fantasy hero who's disabled and is a hero anyway. The world they fall into has magic and talking dog people and flying ships. They definitely could have given him a cool fantasy wheelchair. And then, of course, as the final nail in the coffin, he stays in the world where he is not disabled. Of course, the movie doesn't make it about his disability as such. It tells us he's staying there for love and because he feels he belongs there. In fact, at this point, it pretty much seems to have forgotten he was ever disabled to begin with. And actually, that is kind of what they end up doing, isn't it? He's disabled in our world, but he doesn't belong there. He's not from our world, and in the world he does belong in, well, there he isn't disabled. The world where he isn't disabled is where he belongs. The world where he isn't disabled is the one where he can be a hero and get the girl. And that just feels really awful to see as a disabled viewer. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, consider liking it and maybe subscribing. I will be back here Thursday after next. Bye!